Our guest is Ann Landers, and I think that it's a tribute to you that that's all the introduction you need. There's absolutely nothing more that I need to say except we're glad you could join us today on Weekend World. And I wonder, with all of the work that you do, with all of the letters you have to answer, all the public appearances and everything, how in the world you manage to get control of your time enough to handle it all?
Well, this is a matter of discipline. First, I guess I should say choices are very important. I must decide what is important to do. What do I want to do? Where does it make the most sense for me to be? For an example, coming to Germany, this means I'm out of my office for a good 5 days. Now, is it worth it? Yes, I think it is worth it. And the moment I decided it was worth it, I came. I went to the People's Republic of China several weeks ago. That was a long trip, and I had to decide, was it worth it? And I decided, yes, I'll go, and I did. So it's a matter of choice, selection. And I must say, over the period of the last 20 years, my selections have been really quite good.
Once you make up your mind, I would bet a little bit of money that you don't worry a whole lot. You don't spend a whole lot of time stewing about it or worrying over it.
Never. I mean, that is a brutal waste of time. Once you've made a decision, then you go with it. And if it was not a good decision, then you learn from it. Then you don't make that mistake again.
You have an estimated 60 million readers. What does this do as far as the advice, the type and quality of advice that you give is concerned? Do you have to watch your step, treading on possibly a lot of influential ground?
Never. I answer every letter as if I were speaking to that one person. The fact that 59+ million others are reading that advice makes no difference because I deal on a one-to-one basis. And this is the way I have always written this column. I give the best possible advice to every person who writes to me. And I realize giving advice is an awesome responsibility, and I respect it as such. But I have an incredible collection of experts in almost every field you can think of, and I am constantly checking with those experts to make certain that my advice is correct and sound. So after I have produced the advice, because it isn't often out of my own head, then I don't worry any more about it.
What is it, in your opinion, that causes people to want to write to a total stranger, someone they've probably never even seen in person, just a name in a newspaper with a picture, and a person who they hope can get them out of some misery that's serious enough to have caused them to want to pick up pencil and paper to begin with, when they could go to someone who is perhaps either physically or emotionally closer to them, a clergyman, a counselor, a relative, someone like that?
Well, I think that you've just verbalized the reason they come to me instead of the clergyman or the physician or whatever, or the friend. Often the problem is too intimate to look a person in the eye and recount the details of an alcoholic husband or an unfaithful wife or a disturbed child. It's much easier to write to a stranger. And then, too, I have the feeling that these people who have been reading me for many years don't view me as a stranger. They view me as a friend. People tell me that they've become hooked on my column, that I am a friend, that they think that they know me. Often I'm stopped in airports or on the streets of various cities, and people will come up to me and they'll say, well, hi, I know you. And, of course, they've never met me before, but they feel that they know me. It's this thing of having read me every day for so long that they feel I am a friend.
You don't take the problems personally, though, I don't think. How do you keep from getting emotionally involved in some of these different, very sad situations that you must run across in letters?
Well, I've learned to separate myself from the problem. Because if I did take the problems seriously, then I would be a basket case myself. And I've learned that the best thing I can do is stand off a little and be objective about that person's problem and do my very best to help them. And I know, too, that I have access to the best brains in the country. And I avail myself of those best brains. And I give that bricklayer in Cincinnati or that school teacher in Shamokin, Pennsylvania, I give each and every person who writes to me the very best counsel that I can provide. So then I feel very good about what I've done.
You said something at a press conference earlier today that was interesting. You say you don't offer solutions to problems. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yes. I don't believe that anyone can solve anyone else's problem. All I can do is turn on a light, help them see the problem, give them an opportunity to enlarge on the problem, talk about it. And often in that very process, the person will lead himself to his solution. Because I am not a problem solver. In the final analysis, each person has to solve his own problem. But I can help him see aspects of the problem that perhaps he hasn't seen, or put it in proper perspective for him.
You've been writing an advice column since 1955. What was it that made you want to decide to do this in the beginning?
Well, I had been reading some advice columns. Dorothy Dix was the major column in 55, and she had been dead for 7 years. And it had been, I think at that time, written by several people. And I thought that this would be a marvelous opportunity for a really good advice column with legitimate advice, written by someone who knew the experts, someone who really cared about people, someone who'd had access to the real authorities in the field, and someone who cared enough to work very hard at it. And I thought I would just like to try it.
How have the questions that you've received in 19 or 20 years of doing this column changed? It seems like in the mid-50s or late 50s, most of the questions that you'd read in an advice column in the paper would be about how to set a table or other etiquette questions, or else the traditional my boyfriend, my girlfriend, wife, husband doesn't understand me. Have there been changes?
Well, for an example, 20 years ago, I never heard about marijuana. 20 years ago, the pill had not been invented. 20 years ago, abortion had an altogether different meaning than it has today. I very rarely heard about interracial marriages. Very rarely did I hear about a man who was up in arms because his wife wanted to go to work and wanted him to help with the housework, because she felt that since she was now planning to go to work that he should help her do her job, or what was formerly her job. Lifestyles have changed enormously in the last 20 years, and the changes in the lifestyles are reflected in my column, because people write to me about what is happening to them.
How often do you get a letter now, after 20 years of it, that contains an almost totally new problem to you, something that can make you say, well, in all the time that I've been doing this, I've really never run across one like this?
Well, I'll tell you, that happens almost every day.
Really?
You think that after 20 years, I would have heard every conceivable problem, but
Indeed.
It isn't true. Every single day, I'll get some problem that I have never had before. And this is what makes the work so fascinating, because every day is different.
You mentioned earlier that you just spent several weeks in the People's Republic of China, and I wonder, without trying to ask you to summarize the several very interesting columns that came out of that trip, if there's anything that you... now, you were there mostly in connection with a medical type of tour, as I understand it.
I was an official delegate of the American Medical Association delegation. There were 16 delegates, and I was one of the 16.
Did you have a chance to view things more in the area of family life, the area that is really, I think, your greatest one of expertise?
Mostly we saw hospitals, acupuncture, operations. We saw nurseries. We saw communes. When the Chinese invite a delegation, they try to show them the things that will interest them. And, of course, this is what doctors were interested in. And, of course, being with that delegation, this is what I saw. In addition to, of course, the museums, the Forbidden City, that marvelous Temple of Heaven. I was fortunate, and I had an opportunity to meet our then American liaison officer, David Bruce, who was a perfectly charming man and who will now will be head of NATO. I also had the privilege of having lunch with George Hatem, the American physician who went there in 1929 and stayed and eradicated venereal disease. A most remarkable feat. I had an absolutely extraordinary time, and I learned a great deal. And I came back thinking that there were many things that we could learn from them, of course, which was not a very popular point of view in our country, because many Americans do not like the thought that perhaps there is something that we could learn from the People's Republic of China. But I must say that there are some aspects of their society that I found very refreshing and very rewarding.
If there were one or two that you would like to just import almost as a whole piece right into the States, what would they be?
Well, one would be the way they teach integrity and honesty to their very young children. I was amazed that in every hotel, and we were in many hotels, in Peking, Shenyang, Shanghai, Darien, Peking, many hotels, everyone left the keys to the hotel door on the outside facing the hall. They left their money and jewelry on the dresser. Not one thing was missing. There is very little crime, no mugging on the street, no stealing, no bullet and stab wound treatment in the emergency rooms of hospitals. Absolutely none of that in the People's Republic. And this business of teaching children at the age of 3 that you do not take what doesn't belong to you, that if you find something on the street, even if it's an apple, you give it to the policeman. And if you lose something, you go to the policeman and he'll have it, because that's where everybody turns in what is lost. Now, I think that'd be marvelous if our children learned that you don't take things that don't belong to you.
Our guest is Ann Landers, and we haven't really gotten into the area of why she is in Central Europe, and we'll do that after a little bit of music on Weekend World. Ann Landers is our Weekend World guest this Saturday afternoon, and the reason that she is in Europe, as we said we'd mention, is to attend something called the USAREUR Teen Forum in Berchtesgaden, and there will be a special program on that Monday afternoon at 5:05 on AFN. Hope you get a chance to listen to. About 2 months ago, AFN put an announcement on the air, and there was also a box printed at the bottom of your column in Stars and Stripes inviting military readers, especially in the teen area, to send any problems they might have to you, and I understand you had a couple hundred letters responding to that. I wonder if you found any general trends in the problems of military-dependent types as compared with the general population.
Well, I found in the mail definite indication that the teenagers here feel bored, rudderless, rootless, anxiety-ridden. Many of them are worried about drug involvement, either considering it or are now into it, wondering what it will do to them. Many of them are unhappy about the fact that they have to move just about the time when they've made friends. I'm quite sure that children who grew up in military families either have a much better life than other children or a much worse life, depending on how they look at it.
It depends on the individual child.
Depends on the individual and the mother of that family. I think her attitude is often the way the children feel about a great many things is a reflection of the way the mother feels about whatever's happening in the family. If she views it as a tremendous challenge and a great opportunity and wonderful fun and we're going to see this and that, then often the children pick up this concept. But if she is a whiny, complaining, naggy type, a malcontent, she'll pass this on to her children, and they will also be whining and unhappy.
One of the problems that the military is trying to do something about right now is alcoholism, and I know that you have written pretty extensively on that, and I wonder if you have any feelings on that as it is involved with the military.
Well, alcoholism is always a symptom of something else. Why do people drink? It's a symptom of loneliness, anxiety, inability to handle your problems, escapism. It's many things. Alcoholism is a problem in the military. It has always been a problem in the military. A great many kids who see their parents drinking too much feel that they have a right to smoke pot and drink if they want to. It's a sad situation. I don't know that there are any easy answers. I feel that there's a great deal of work that can be done with alcoholics. Alcoholics Anonymous, I think, does the best job of any group that I know of. Alcoholics Anonymous does better than psychiatry or religion or any kind of counseling. It's this business of people getting together and talking about a common problem and looking at the next fellow and saying, look, if I can make it, you can make it. Or I made it and I'll help you make it because I was in worse shape than you're in. So I don't know how many AA chapters you have around the bases, but I would suggest if you don't have many, you could use more.
Pretty fair number, and they are publicized on AFN, and I think that might be an answer.
They do a marvelous job. And then, of course, there's Al-Anon for the wives of alcoholics, and often a woman who goes to Al-Anon learns how to deal with her alcoholic husband, and he winds up going to AA. Then there is another group called Al-Teen for teenagers who have alcoholic parents. And often these teenagers, and incidentally, these are the saddest letters of all, kids who have alcoholic parents, especially when there are several children in the family and the older children have to raise the younger ones because their parents are bombed out of their heads every night and they're non-functional. So the kids have to do the cooking and the cleaning and the laundry and everything because mom can't do it and pop's in no shape for anything. So Al-Ateen is a very helpful group, and I am very strong for Al-Ateen, Al-Anon, and AA.
Noticed a letter in your column, one of your columns earlier this past week, in which you were talking about premarital sex. And you expressed some views which, in the small town I grew up in the mid-'50s, would have caused your name to have been banned from the town forevermore. How have your views changed on some of these issues that are very much at the forefront today compared to...
Now let me be the interviewer. Let me ask you something. Where is this town in which you grew up?
One small town in northern Ohio.
What was the name of it?
Sandusky.
Well, I know Sandusky very well. In fact, I spoke 6 miles from Sandusky about a month ago for Clark Management. They had a convention there, and I saw a sign that said Sandusky. I says, my golly, where is it? They said 6 miles from here.
That's part of the story of Sandusky, but you do not seem to have any rail marks on your body from having been run out of town on one.
No, nobody has ever run me out of Sandusky or any other town. Is this the one where I advised a mother who had caught her young daughter having sexual intercourse with the boyfriend? She caught him right on the couch,
yes,
right?
Right.
I remember this letter very well because I've heard a great deal about it. But I think that advice was sound, and I think it was correct, and I would give that advice again.
But the question is it advice that you would have given in 1955 or 56?
Now, that's another question. Probably not.
How have your views changed?
Well, it seems to me that change is growth, and times have changed. A teenager today is much further advanced physically, emotionally. I don't know whether or not he's more advanced intellectually, but physically and emotionally he's more advanced than he was 20 years ago. Also, he has been subjected to a great deal more sexuality. Advertising. You see things in the movie houses today that you would never have seen even 10 years ago. You see books on sex. You see pictures. Now they not only have pictures of nude females, but they have pictures of nude males in the magazines. This is the new centerfold look. It's a different world today. And you've got to give different advice because people are behaving differently. There are certain elements of behavior that I think are constant, but I think the sexual patterns have changed. I don't feel that I've collapsed or given in, but I do feel that I have become realistic. And if a 16-year-old girl is having sexual intercourse with her boyfriend and her mother catches her, makes no sense to tell that girl, I don't want you to see that fellow again, and I want you to stop this business right now and never again do this thing, because this girl is not going to stop. If she really cares about this boy, she's not going to stop seeing him. She's going to see him whether her mother approves or not. It's most unrealistic to think that a 16-year-old girl who has had sex is going to stop having sex because either Ann Landers or her mother tells her not to. She's going to continue. So my approach is realistic. I told that mother that she should take that girl to a doctor and let the doctor decide what kind of contraceptive is best for her. And that's the way it ought to be. Now, if a girl of 16 would write to me and tell me that she has never had sexual relations, but she's considering it, and asks for my advice, I would say, in my opinion, this would be an unwise thing to do. I am not encouraging, nor am I condoning, sex for 16-year-old girls. I would say, I think you'll regret it. Hold out. I think it's a very good thing to hold out. But if a girl has already had sexual intercourse, I think the best thing to do is to help her learn how to keep from getting venereal disease and help her to learn how to keep from getting pregnant.
In radio, we have some kind of an idea of the people we are broadcasting to. We know a certain percentage of them are in a certain age group, about what percentage of them are male, the other female, and so forth. And I wonder if you have, we call this a target audience, and I wonder if you have one in mind when you sit down to write the column.
Well, we know what our mail is in the same way that you know what your listening audience is. We analyze our mail very often. We know that almost half of our mail comes from men. We know that about 25% of our readers are teenagers and about 75% are older. We know that the people who read Ann Landers' column are school teachers, bricklayers, ditch diggers, construction workers, college professors, bank presidents, nurses, doctors, clergymen. Every conceivable segment of society reads this column. Some of the letters are screamingly funny, others are tragic. Some people who write are extremely intelligent, others are fantastically ignorant. Some are psychotic, some are putting me on, but most of them are very serious.
You mentioned a little earlier that you have learned something about handwriting in regards to one of those categories you just mentioned.
Yeah, well, now, I do not believe that there's any validity in graphoanalysis and all this kind of business. I don't think you can tell whether a person is honest or smart or dumb or generous or ignoble by looking at the handwriting. I do not believe this. But I do know that there is such a thing as psychotic handwriting. And I have learned to recognize psychotics from their handwriting. Every day I'll get at least 3 or 4 psychotics. And the handwriting is usually very large, and the letters are very close together. Often they're off the line. If the paper's lined, they're writing off the line. They're writing either up across the page or down, and writing very close together. The words are often very closely spaced. And usually the letters are very long, and they jump from one subject to another. Often unfinished sentences, unfinished words. And you can tell that these people are psychotic.
Do you tackle these letters with any more sense of urgency than more run-of-the-mill types?
Well, we immediately respond, and we tell the person who has written, if there's a name and an address, and not all letters have names and addresses, we tell them that we believe that they need psychiatric help, and then we suggest a place for them to go.
Thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope that the appearance at the Teen Forum is as successful as everything you've been doing here at AFN today has been.
Well, thank you very much for asking me. I've enjoyed this very much.
Our guest, Ann Landers. For Weekend World, this is Bill Swisher.